Katie here with the new Studio Ink. Finally, time to go ahead and put the studio into use. And as I discussed, here's the montage. This is the beginning of me working through the composition aspect of it and testing out my overhead camera. Thanks for checking it out. I hope everybody's having a wonderful evening. I'm going to go ahead and get to it. Okay, so to get my montage video started, before I even get into the drawing phase, I decided that I wanted to share how I approach it. Since I am drawing from actual reference from the 1982 series right here, that I have up on Marketplace and Craigslist, because as I said in the previous video, I'm ready to move on from my collection so that I can put my focus entirely on my own creations. And sometimes the best thing you can do when you're doing something like that is to completely remove yourself from any kind of cross contamination that can happen to you from having it at access, real easy access. And I'm a real comic girl geek. I really do love comic books, so I do read them. I did read these. I love them, so I sealed them away and I'm done. I quit reading them. I'm one of those. I have that kind of memory, so I know the overall theme and the story very well. I didn't need to go back and reread it a bunch of times. Technically, 1982 is when this came out, and it was a very interesting year in America. And for me, it was my first year to be here at the age of 10, after being in Europe during my formative years. It was my first time. I had come back here for about 2 weeks. We lived like 18 months, but we moved every 6 months to 3 different states, and we mostly kept isolated because we weren't going to be there very long. So I did do a little bit of time in America, and then we moved to another base where we locked down and we were isolated away from American culture. So for me, 1982 is one of those windows of what American culture was that I could carry with me throughout being isolated from it. Being isolated from it for me was, in Europe, we didn't have a lot of direct contact with American culture. It was delayed. I had no idea what was going on out here while I was living over there in the late 70s, early 80s. And then that 2 weeks that I did spend around civilians, like my grandfather and so forth, I got to see the real contradiction and the real, like, clash of generations that was starting to go on. See, my grandfather and others were like, war veterans, and he specifically was a war veteran of the Second World War. But there were Korean War veterans and Vietnam War veterans in my immediate family in that area, because, yeah, we're a long-term military family. And that elder generation really did have a real resentment of Asian culture. Kind of a, they didn't hate them, but they still had a bit of a chip on their shoulder from what they had to go and do, and what they experienced. And but then their younger generation, like their kids and so forth, didn't have that kind of aversion towards Asian culture at all, really. Um, they, in fact, what I could tell by television and things like that I got to see for 2 weeks was that there was kind of a marriage or a merger of the two cultures taking place. Now, this is back in an era where manga wasn't a word. I mean, for people in America, they didn't know what it was. I was, like I said, coming from Europe, I didn't even know what it was. I didn't find out until, because I was a comic book fan, I kind of, as I got older, got really into it. But it was like contraband to get it back in those days. It was very hard to get, and none of it was translated into English. Um, but what's interesting about this is Chris Claremont was the writer on this 4-part series, and Frank Miller. Most people think of Frank Miller, they think of like his movie career, and don't realize that, or if they're aware of the fact that he was a comic book artist, Batman and Sin City are the ones that pop in their head. But the dude actually started his career at Marvel. And this is like kind of where he was at his most badass while he was at Marvel. Um, and this is kind of the beginning of his working with anti-heroes and so forth, really coming into his own. And he's one of my all-time favorite artists and a big influence on me. Um, so that's part of why I wanted to make this montage because I'm selling it to let it go, and I would like to have a keepsake of my favorite comic, which was definitely Wolverine, because there was just something about his globe trotting, his world traveling experience I could relate to. Now, like his masculine aspects, not so much. I mean, I could see it in the people around me and in the men around me, but not myself personally. I understand it a great deal now. I mean, there's a lot of really heavy psychology that goes on in all four of these, and a real look into things like domestic violence and clashing of cultures and just a lot of cool things like that. What I have here is all the things that I want to kind of incorporate into it. And this is how I like to do it. First, I like to just kind of pull it all together into a really loose understanding visually. And then my next step, which I'll put in the next video, will be me actually sketching these and reducing these and then clipping those out. Because I mean, they'll be easier for me to work with. Clipping them out and getting even more refined in the placement of where they need to be. Because one of the things I really want to do is make sure that I get the grasp the main narrative that this whole four-part series was about. Um, Chris Claremont and Miller are from that generation that was they grew up with like the late 1950s to 1960s Hollywood movies, and a lot of those were like movies about like American soldiers in post-war Japan or so forth, kind of you know dealing with the cultural difference and the clash of cultures going on, and like cross-culture romance and like Marlon Brando was in one. Those kind of things. Those are things that influenced them. But also, they were fans of Bruce Lee, and they were like fans of the kung fu theater stuff. And so, what you end up getting with Wolverine in these very first four issues is this kind of Ronin samurai meets a Western rugged, outdoorsy kind of guy. And that's still carried on throughout all of the title, even to this day. That's a part of his character. Now, during this, he was an agent, actually, and he recognized that he was a Canadian. He was a Canadian agent. His name was Logan, but his name was also, he was known as Patches, which that name kind of faded away, and Logan stayed, but Logan is actually his name. Patches, I think, was more connected to his alias when he was X Factor and when he was with the Canadian, government and so forth as an agent. Um, But yeah, what I'm gonna want to try to capture is all the things that were in that, and then kind of get it composed in a way that is really clean, tells the narrative, and is a good visual reminder of something I love. That it's finally time for me to grow beyond. I appreciate everybody that took the time to come check out at least the beginnings of my thinking on it. And like I said, every artist has their own approach to something like this. But this is kind of how I get started. If I'm doing something from a reference material instead of purely from my imagination, which is usually what I do. But because of Chris Nolan's garbage version of the Odyssey, I felt compelled to do something about it, and I did speak out about it a little bit online. But that's not really the best way to handle what he's done, this disrespect that he's done. So it told me to write my own. And my brain was like, it needs to be a comic book. It's the one genre that I never really tackled. When I was younger, I wanted to do it. I grew out of it when I got into painting and sculpting and other mediums, but I still have my love for it. And somehow this kind of feels perfect full circle type of thing. So I counter his shitting on Western culture, shitting on one of my all-time favorite pieces of literature, and shitting on a culture that I'm very, very much connected to. Um, You know, I want to honor Greece, and I hate seeing what he's done. Totally dishonor a culture that regularly gets ignored or marginalized. Or if you listen to documentaries, they pretend like they don't even exist, and that's not right. They're all over. We're everywhere. We're different, but not that different. You know, um, and it's still not right that he's disrespected the foundation of Western culture like that. So I have written something, and I plan on executing it. But like I said, I want to go ahead and part ways with my old collection. Go ahead and liquidate it all throughout June, and once it's liquidated, move into my own piece and start composing my own. Um, so anyway, I like how it's laying out so far, and yeah, sitting here just reminds me of so many things. Like I said, that brief stint coming back to America and being around my grandfather and listening to him complain about stuff like Kung Fu theater sullying his westerns. I'm already educated enough by then to know that, yeah, Asians were a big part of the Wild West. It's just that American filter from that era that, like, totally, from like prior to the 80s, prior to the 80s, everybody was mad about Japanese cars being imported, and they were just mad in general about the Asian influence on America. But it was very clear when I came back in '82 that, like, the culture itself, the young people were all the way about Bruce Lee, although he had passed away by then. They were all the way about Bruce Lee. They were all into the samurai, all watching the kung fu movies. And you hear my grandfather sit there and dog on it and all that, but then later in the evening when he's winding down before going to bed, sit there and listen to him reminisce about how he misses his girlfriend that he had in Guam and how awesome Guam was. And I'm sitting there going, this dude doesn't know he's being a hypocrite. But in a way, it's not a knock against him. It taught me something about humans. That's actually the reason you can meet a person who's completely contradictory. It's because they're driven by their ego's image of themselves and not their reality. They really can't see themselves. They can't hear themselves. And so, for me, I endeavored to tackle alchemy so that I would make sure that I never had this distorted view of myself that would prevent me from growing or acknowledging truths. So anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this up, and I will put up another video where I actually start drawing up some of these and taking the pieces I want out of it. Okay, this wraps up the first part of the video of me sketching up my montage, the beginning one. Um, Thank you for taking the time to check it out, and I appreciate a like, subscribe, share it. And any comments, questions, I'll totally answer them. Have a great night, everybody, and I'll see you on the next video in the series. Bye.